Now, did you guys know Joe Rogan is into sim racing?
It's entirely possible.
He's a degenerate like us. I'll admit that I didn't know that, but you guys sent me like 50,000 messages saying like, have you seen Joe Rogan's sim rig? So I thought it'd be a good idea to check out Joe Rogan's sim rig build, maybe talk about some of the bits that I like, some of the bits I dislike, and whether it's worth that massive $70,000 price tag. Quickly, if you're new to the channel, you don't know who I am, my name is Jimmy. I've been a sim racer for
too long.
And I also co-own a business called Britsy, which is a sim racing hardware reseller. So yeah, I've used a lot of gear in my time. I know what is kind of for show and what is for function. So I'm quite interested to see what happens when you build a sim rig with no budget in mind. Let's go. Well, it looks sweet. First impressions, triple monitor, motion rig.
This is Joe Rogan's.
That's pretty badass. I'm not gonna lie. I did notice one thing. I'm gonna be a massive nerd and pick up on this now and probably get back to it later on. That with the motion, it's not connected to the monitors. It's rig only. I'll get into that a little bit later.
If you guys are new here, we are Podium One Racing, and we are the world's best turnkey sim builders, and this is just another one in the process. Now, you guys haven't seen some of the sims we've built.
I can't say I've heard of these guys before. That's not a bad thing though. Sorry to do the guy dirty by pausing him like this. But there are quite a few companies out there nowadays who will say, right, give us X amount of money and we'll bring an awesome sim rig to your house, which is a very cool idea, but I do think you end up paying a bit over the odds for that. Let's let him explain the rig though before we start jumping to any of those conclusions.
So the P1 Ultimate is the top of the line system that we have here at Podium One Racing, and this is the Ultimate with the Obsessed Garage option on it, and we're actually adding on a few extra details that are going to be unique to Joe's sim specifically. As you guys can see, where it's at right now is a lot of the wiring is done. We have the pedal.
First things first, let's talk about the rig itself, the actual base. Those little metal bars you see there. That is, looks to be 80/20, which is what my sim rig here is made out of, although maybe not quite as nicely finished as as this one. And this rig itself nowadays, you can pick up the profile to do this and probably build your own sturdy frame for about 300 to 400 pounds if you look in the right places. The frame itself isn't really anything special, but it doesn't really need to be. In fact, I'd even argue that having this sort of rig can be a little bit too hardcore for the normal user. What I'm getting at is that it's definitely the standard for like a nice sturdy rig, which is super important, especially when you have things like direct drive wheels mounted to them.
One of the unique aspects that we did for Joe was we painted it in a actual Porsche chalk gray. He didn't specifically want any particular custom color.
And that's pretty cool.
Here we like to have a little bit of that custom finish on.
But I am going to say, which is it this bit that's painted chalk grey or the profile? Because the profile, this is a Porsche chalk grey, guys. I've got the Porsche chalk grey right here. To be fair, I think they have actually painted bits of it that colour, but it doesn't really stand out that much, does it? It just sort of blends in with the rest of it. But maybe I should paint this mint after my crazy MX-5.
But with some of the touches that we wanted to add on, we wanted to make it unique because it's obviously Joe Rogan. One of those big things is going to be the seat. Now we're going to take you guys to the back and show you guys a little bit information on that seat before we go ahead and add it on and install it onto the sim.
So I'm really interested to see what seat they've got for this. So for me, the two big important things in the sim rig, and you might think, oh, wheel pedals. No, it's not. It's the rig itself, keeping something sturdy, and your seat. Something that's comfy and supports your back is very important, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of laps. Driving is not a natural position to be in. You end up being like a fucking hermit like this guy after all this time. But I am going to go ahead and guess they haven't used my Swampass Edition OMP TRSE. This writing's actually starting to go brown. I really need to replace this seat. Yeah, okay, nice.
Actual race car seat from Recaro. This is the Recaro Podium seat right here, as you can tell.
That's an expensive seat. Got the homologation stickers on, so you can use this in a real race car if you want to, which is pretty mad and pretty overkill. It does look sweet, you know. I wouldn't mind something like that here. Looks actually deceptively comfy too.
Might be wondering.
Thing is with sim seats, and if you have a little bit of money to spend on a nice seat, then I feel like you fall into a trap of going for something nice and racy and carbon fibery. And I've done that before. I've had a carbon fiber tillet seat on my old Praga rig. And it looked great, but after like an hour in the rig, you start feeling a bit uncomfy. There's not really much room for you to breathe in there. But I really recommend, I know it's not the most premium thing, is just go to your like local junkyard and pick up like a second-hand car seat. You don't need to have a bucket seat in sim racing, and unless you have a motion rig, which it seems that Joe does, so maybe he does need one, but for the normal person, you don't need a bucket seat.
There's gonna be several dozen peripherals installed on this rig, meaning that USB cables have to be powered properly, whether it's USB 3.0, 2.0, data cables for the motion actuators. For us, it's like a giant puzzle of putting it together in the most perfect way. So we've got probably 15 to 20 hours in wiring just on the chassis.
15 to 20 hours of wiring. Maybe this is what I'm doing wrong. What I do is I actually, I'm not even going to show you what mine looks like. My cable management, well, there is none.
But this thing has to be able to support up to 1,000 pounds, moving, vibrations. There's a lot of things going on. People putting, 100 kilograms of pressure on a brake pedal. So that means that every nut and bolt has to be so tight to a point where someone could have this rig for 2 years and race on it, 10 hours a week, and nothing moves unless it's supposed to. Guys like
I agree with that. Your rig does need to be sturdy. But I put this rig together myself, and it's been together 6 years. I don't think that's a reason to charge someone 50 grand. I feel really cynical in this video so far. I'm like, nah, you shouldn't do that. Nah, you shouldn't do that. I think my cynicism comes from I've been exposed to a lot of what I like to call collector sim rigs. Big brands will basically put out their own version of a sim rig. There's like an Aston Martin one that came out that was like the best part of £250,000, and it's just, a normal wheel with a nice shell around it. And the whole idea for sim racing for me is that we sim race because we can't go real racing, because it's very expensive, and sim racing shouldn't be at the point where it costs the same as a race car.
And then we have to get into things like ergonomics, right? Where should a shifter be? Where should an e-brake be? Where should a steering wheel be? How should it be positioned? Those are things that we have to think through. But when you start to get into a system that can be used for actual training, there's a lot of stuff that we have to think through in the back end.
I do agree with that. When we set up the Praga rig for training, it was very different from the rig that we used here. This is like a content rig, the one I jump in and just mess around and have fun with. It's not set up to be the most realistic. With the Praga rig, we took measurements of the car, we got the brake force, we got the throttle force all done properly. And that's the reason why we use that carbon fiber seat I mentioned earlier on, to sort of sit down with it and to give the proper driving position, just how it was in real life. And I have to say that there was a value to that.
Racing they're going to be doing. But for Joe's, he's got a 993 Gunther Works Porsche. We know he's a Porsche fan. So he's got an officially licensed Porsche RSR replica wheel.
This is pretty cool. I've seen a few of these around before. I'm a big sucker for, well, in general, but for motorsport style wheels. I always like the closest you can get to a wheel looking like it belongs in a real life racing car. For me, is the cooler it is. It's the same with this. Got this Moser FSR wheel here. Basically the same thing. Looks like a real racing wheel. And I think for immersion, actually physically trying to place yourself in this pretend cockpit and pretend you're there driving as you do in sim racing, then that sort of thing is really important.
I will say something I've been waiting for since we got this seat, Carlson.
Is Joe gonna fit in this? Joe's a pretty big guy. I have this image of him being like this, and he just can't quite get into the back of it.
We want to show you guys as much detail as possible and give you guys as much.
Bless me. I just paused to sneeze there, and I keep doing this poor guy so dirty on the pauses. Editor, please insert a freeze frame of me sneezing. Let's do that with side by side. Who did it best? Let me know in the comments.
So the pedal set that we have here, we've got 2 static pedals for the throttle and clutch. These are the Husingfeld Ultimates, company out of Germany. They make by far the best pedals in sim
company
racing.
out of the
We'll
Netherlands,
see this later
actually.
on. It can move by itself. Now, why would you want it to move by itself? All the subtle nuances. For instance, if you're driving a car like a GT4 Porsche with ABS, you can feel the ABS.
Now, I've not actually ever driven with a haptic pedal before, but what he's saying here is completely correct. I've raced in real life in a whole host of different cars with and without ABS. And for example, in a downforce car with no ABS, you have to stamp the brake as hard as you can, then gently peel off to avoid the brake locking up. Whereas in a GT3 car or a GT4 car, you can just smash that brake pedal all you like. You'll go into the ABS, but you'll feel the ABS activating in your foot. And I've been told it's the exact same experience on one of these pedals, which would be very, very helpful. Is it essential? No. Is it cool? Yeah.
There are 3 Samsung Odyssey Arc 4K 55-inch screens going on this setup. If you guys don't know how massive those are, we actually have a few of them over there. We're going to show you guys us putting them on here
That's
in a bit.
pretty
Let's
ridiculous.
show you guys the stand. Obviously, it is paint to match the entire sim, so this is the paint to sample.
I'm sorry, but every time they say this, I just look at my own sim rig. It's the same. I wonder how much they spent on the paint there, because... But to be fair to these guys, I am looking at a video. I'm sure it looks different in person, but on the video, it doesn't look too much different.
Here is the PC. Big boy. What do we got
That is a
here?
big boy.
Fully custom built PC with an NVIDIA RTX 4090. We've got DDR5, 64 gigs of RAM. We're liquid cooled, and we've got an i9 13th gen processor. So essentially what we
That's
do
pretty
for our
beefy.
PC, we want to have 20-30% headroom in every PC, both from a processing standpoint, from a graphics standpoint, so that we can run the highest frame rates possible. The most that we can power is 120 hertz, and that's an NVIDIA lock. You can't go above 120 hertz for triple 4Ks.
To be honest, you don't really need that. There's a lot of these crazy, like, high refresh rate monitors out there, and you don't really need to have this uber giga setup to do that. I still think that racing with 60 FPS is completely fine. You can, I mean, run 120 is a bit nicer, but beyond that, it doesn't make that too much of a difference. But I do agree with having a 4090 in there. The resolution is going to be the killer on this. Having 3 4K monitors is pretty ridiculous. So it's just the best course of action, because the worst thing when you're sim racing is having an inconsistent frame rate, because it messes up everything, messes up all your markers, messes up your braking, messes your concentration as well. So yeah, beefy card, but worth it, I think.
Look how crazy wide that angle is. We're gonna be able to give you guys a better representation
cool.
once we get all the monitors on, so you can see what it looks like powered up, but this is insane. I wanted to time lapse this part of the build because this is something you guys don't see, all the tedious work that goes into the wiring. So here's a little bit of time lapse of that. We are now on the stage of the
That seemed
monitors
pretty
for
quick.
Joe Rogan sim set.
Well, sorry, I'm being such a dickhead in this video, man. I feel like I'm really being horrible to these guys. I think just because I've seen so many of these like high-end rig builders who use these words like attention to detail and build quality and all that, and that stuff exists outside of the 50 grand bracket, you know. It's got to be something special if you're going to ask that amount of money. So I'm holding this to like the highest possible standard.
The monitors, you can see the massive 55-inch Samsung Arc 4K curved monitors, looking absolutely stunning. We got all the lights set up, we got the subwoofer back here, all the wiring is tucked and ready to go, as well as we have the PC, obviously.
It is pretty intense, this thing. It looks pretty crazy. I really like what they've done down here with the wheels.
All 4 wheels that we have are not just powered here, they're also synced with software, so you can run everything about the wheels as they're powered here. You can add YouTube videos on them, you can add different parts of the screen on there. Anything you want can be run, it's not just powered, which has never been done before.
I would argue it's not been done before because it's just not useful. It's cool to have that, right? It's nice to see them illuminated down there when you're showing the rig off the pictures and stuff, but would you have that when you're driving? I don't know. But it is cool. I like the idea of it. It's one of those things where it's cool, but it just serves no purpose. So right, here's my biggest pet peeve of this rig, is that it's on this motion platform, which is cool. Motion platforms, I think, they're up and down. Some people do motion platforms well. A lot of people do them badly. It's very tempting to crank up the motion so you can show off look how crazy my thing's moving around. But it's to the point where it's unrealistic and it actually hinders your driving. I'm actually quite curious as to why they didn't opt to have any sort of harness. People laugh at the idea of having a harness in a fake sim seat, but when you have motion, you need to go that extra level and have that harness there too to actually keep you in your seat, keep you there planted. The biggest pet peeve is that this rig moves independently of the monitor. Can you imagine if you're driving a car around a circuit and you're in there like, and everything in front of you is just completely static? If you're going to say things like it can be used for training and it's super realistic and it's attention to detail, it just feels very strange to omit that.
We've got our HOTAS controls with
Now, this is actually a bit that I'm going to skip because I actually don't know anything about flight sims at all. I'm a 100% a racing guy. It does look sweet though, doesn't it? With those monitors, it looks pretty damn cool. That looks wicked. Okay, but that looks like it's about it. And I guess the question I want to ask first is, do I think this rig is worth $70,000? No, is the short answer, but I can see that there's been a lot of work that's put into making it look nice and making this quite high-end gear super accessible to someone maybe who doesn't quite understand how to use it. There are a couple of oversights, like things I mentioned, like no harnesses on the motion rig, and the monitor's also moving independently of that motion rig. That kind of looks a little bit strange to me. I'm not against companies like this who make this sort of high-end sim rigs for, I guess, high-end client, but it does seem something that I've seen sort of creep into the sim racing market, where it's just this weird kind of almost luxury sim brands where they'll make you a rig but they'll charge you out the arse for it, when in reality you can build something that's a lot better, a lot more realistic, and probably a lot more fun for a lot less money. Not gonna lie though, I will love those monitors. Those monitors are ridiculous. I can't imagine how immersive that would be, sitting there with these monitors wrapping around you. But you know what I think this rig would actually benefit from more than those big monitors, and you probably save a whole heap of money from it as well, is just using a VR headset. No monitor setup can beat the 3D effect that VR has, in my opinion. What do you guys think? Is $70,000 too much for a sim rig? Let me know down below in the comments. Take care, have an awesome day. See you next time.